The burgundy scarf felt like a noose around Sarah Chen's neck, but she kept it tight anyway. Better suffocating fabric than the stairs. Always the stairs. She settled into seat 14C of the military transport, a C-40 Clipper that smelled like stale coffee and jet fuel, a scent that used to make her heart race with excitement. Now it just made her hands tremble. She pressed her forehead against the cold window, watching the tarmac of Naval Air Station North Island blur beneath them as the aircraft climbed into the pale January sky. San Diego sprawled below, all sun-bleached buildings and glittering ocean, the city where she'd once been somebody, where Lieutenant Commander Sarah Phoenix Chen had been a legend. That woman was dead now, officially, permanently. The Navy had folded a flag into a perfect triangle and handed it to her mother 3 years ago while a bugler played taps. Sarah had watched the funeral from a hospital room in Virginia, her face so swollen and burned she was unrecognizable even to herself. She'd watched her mother sob, watched her father, a retired Marine colonel, stand stone-faced and shaking. Watched her squadron brothers and sisters weep over an empty casket, while she breathed through a tube and wished she actually was dead. The scarf covered most of the scar tissue that crawled up her neck like angry red vines, but her hands were harder to hide. The doctors had done their best, but skin grafts could only do so much. When the flight attendant, a young petty officer who couldn't have been more than 22, offered her a beverage, Sarah saw the girl's eyes flicker to the scarred knuckles, the too smooth patches where fire had melted away fingerprints. "Water, please," Sarah said quietly, her voice raspy. Another gift from the flames, smoke inhalation had damaged her vocal cords. "Of course, ma'am." The girl smiled professionally, but Sarah caught the quick glance, the momentary widening of eyes. She was used to it. People couldn't help themselves. They'd look at her face, at the scars that no amount of makeup could fully conceal, and their minds would fill with questions they were too polite to ask. "What happened to you? Were you in an accident? Does it hurt?" Yes, every second of every day. Not the physical pain that had mostly faded, but the phantom aches, the memories that lived in those scars like ghosts under her skin. Each one was a story she'd never tell. Sarah pulled her tablet from her bag, ostensibly to review the technical specifications she was supposed to consult on in Washington. Aviation systems integration for the Navy's newest fighters. The irony was almost funny. She'd once flown the most advanced combat aircraft in the world, threading the needle through enemy air defenses at supersonic speeds. Now she sat in meetings and offered expert opinions to people who would never know that the quiet consultant with the scarred hands had once been the best of the best. The tablet screen reflected her face back at her, 34 years old but looking 40. The scars ran from her right temple down to her jaw, a roadmap of suffering that no surgeon could erase. Her left eye still worked perfectly, but the right one had a slight droop, nerve damage from the explosion. She'd been beautiful once, not that it mattered. Beauty was for people who still had lives. "Excuse me, ma'am." Sarah looked up. A young Marine stood in the aisle, maybe 25, with the fresh-faced earnestness of someone who still believed in heroes. He wore dress blues, probably heading home on leave. There was something in his eyes, recognition maybe. No, impossible. Phoenix was dead. "Yes?" she asked, her tone deliberately flat, discouraging. He hesitated, shifting his weight. "I'm sorry to bother you, but have we met before? You look familiar." Her heart rate spiked, but her face remained impassive, a skill she'd learned in captivity when showing emotion meant showing weakness. "I don't think so. I have one of those faces." He frowned slightly, not convinced but too polite to push. "Sorry, my mistake." He moved back to his seat, but Sarah felt his gaze on her several more times during the flight. Careful, she thought, getting sloppy. She turned back to the window. They were over the desert now, vast and brown and merciless. Somewhere down there, maybe 300 miles south, was the place where Sarah Chen had died and something else had been born. Something harder, something broken. 23 months she'd spent in that underground facility. 23 months of questions she wouldn't answer, of pain designed to make her betray every oath she'd ever taken. They'd wanted classified information, targeting systems, encryption codes, operational procedures. She'd given them nothing but her name, rank, and service number, over and over until the words lost meaning. The worst part wasn't the torture. The worst part was the silence after, when they'd leave her alone in the dark for days, weeks, until she'd started to wonder if she'd imagined the whole world above ground. If there had ever been a sky, if she'd ever really flown. But she had escaped. 17 miles through the desert with broken ribs and a fractured leg, navigating by stars she'd studied at the Naval Academy a lifetime ago. She'd crawled, stumbled, dragged herself toward what she hoped was friendly territory. When the CIA finally found her, she'd been delirious, hallucinating, more corpse than woman. They'd offered her everything when she recovered: medals, promotions, a chance to return to the cockpit. "You're a hero," they'd said. "America needs to know your story." But Sarah had looked at herself in the hospital mirror, at the stranger with the burns and the haunted eyes, and she'd known the truth. The woman who'd earned those medals was gone. Phoenix had burned up for real this time, and what remained was just ash. "Let me stay dead," she'd told them, "please." So they had. New identity, new life, new purpose, or at least the illusion of purpose. Technical consulting, advisory roles, teaching people who would actually fly the missions she only dreamed about anymore. The aircraft hit turbulence and Sarah's hands gripped the armrests white-knuckled. Just weather. Normal. Nothing to worry about. But her pulse hammered anyway, and for a moment she was back in her FA-18, alarms screaming, fire erupting around her, the last seconds before. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some light chop. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The captain's voice over the intercom, professional, calm. Sarah focused on breathing, on grounding herself in the present. The turbulence smoothed out. The flight continued. She glanced toward the cockpit door, sealed and secure. Behind it, 2 pilots were doing what she used to do, managing systems, making decisions, keeping everyone safe. It looked so easy from outside. People had no idea the split-second calculations, the constant vigilance, the weight of all those lives resting on your judgment. Sarah closed her eyes and let the engine noise wash over her. In 90 minutes, they'd land at Andrews Air Force Base. She'd attend her meetings, give her expert opinions, collect her consulting fee, and return to San Diego. Return to her small apartment with its view of the ocean she could no longer enjoy. Return to the half-life she'd chosen because the alternative, facing the world as the broken remnant of a hero, was too painful to contemplate. The woman in 14C was nobody, just another passenger on another flight. And that, Sarah thought, was exactly how it should be. Phoenix was dead. Long live the ghost, 3 years earlier. USS Abraham Lincoln, Persian Gulf. 4:30 hours. The pre-dawn briefing room buzzed with controlled energy. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Phoenix Chen sat in the front row, her flight suit crisp, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Around her, the cream of naval aviation, the best fighter pilots in the world, studied mission parameters on glowing screens. "Operation Silent Thunder is a go," Commander Jack Hammer Morrison announced, his voice cutting through the murmur. "We have actionable intelligence on 3 American contractors held in a compound approximately 40 miles inside hostile territory. The window is narrow, 6 hours before they're moved to a location we can't touch." Sarah's eyes never left the tactical display. The compound sat in a valley surrounded by mountains, protected by surface-to-air missile batteries and anti-aircraft artillery. The approach vectors looked like threading a needle while riding a motorcycle, blindfolded, at night. She loved it. "Phoenix, you'll fly lead on the strike package," Morrison continued. "Reaper, you're her wingman. Titan and Viper will provide top cover. Goose and Maverick will handle SAM suppression. He paused, looking directly at Sarah. This is a zero-fail mission. Those contractors have families waiting. We bring them home. Yes, sir, Sarah replied, her voice steady. Inside, her heart sang. This was what she'd trained her entire life to do. This was why she'd endured the academy, survived flight school, fought her way into a combat squadron when plenty of people still thought women didn't belong in fighters. Marcus Reaper Williams caught her eye and grinned. He'd been her wingman for 2 years, and they flew together like they shared one brain. Just like the Sims, Phoenix, in and out before they know what hit them. Except the Sims don't shoot back for real, she replied, returning his smile. By 600 hours, Sarah was strapped into her FA-18 Super Hornet, running through her pre-flight checklist with the precision of a concert pianist. The carrier deck roared with activity, jet engines screaming, catapult officers signaling, the controlled chaos of a floating city preparing to launch its deadliest assets. "Phoenix, you are cleared for takeoff," the air boss called. Sarah saluted the catapult officer, pushed her throttles to full military power, and felt the familiar hand of God slam her back into her seat as the catapult fired. 3 seconds later, she was airborne, her Super Hornet clawing into the pre-dawn sky at 300 knots and accelerating. "Phoenix is airborne. Reaper, join on me." "Roger that, boss, right behind you." The strike package formed up perfectly, 6 aircraft flying in tactical formation, invisible to radar ghosts in the darkness. Sarah checked her systems one final time. Weapons, armed, navigation, locked, threat warning, active, everything was green. They crossed into hostile airspace at 6:47 hours. "Remember, radio silence from here on," Sarah transmitted. "We're guests who weren't invited to this party." The flight was smooth for the first 20 minutes. Too smooth. Sarah's instincts prickled, the kind of combat-turned sixth sense that separated the living from the dead. She scanned her threat display constantly, watching for the telltale spike that would indicate radar lock. "Phoenix, I've got intermittent radar emissions at 2 o'clock, Reaper called. "Looks like a mobile SAM battery." "Copy, Goose, you see it." "Affirmative, tracking, ready to engage on your mark." They were 10 miles from the target when everything went to hell. The threat warning receiver screamed, multiple radar locks, tracking, missile launch detection. The calm electronic voice filled her helmet. Missile launch, break right, break right." Sarah's hands moved on pure instinct, yanking the stick hard right, punching chaff and flares, pulling 9 Gs in a desperate spiral. The world compressed, blood draining from her head, vision tunneling. She grunted against the pressure, fighting to stay conscious. "Phoenix, you've got 2 SA-15s tracking." Reaper's voice was tight with adrenaline. She saw them, white contrails reaching up through the darkness like the fingers of death. Surface-to-air missiles, locked on, closing at Mach 3. The first one bought the chaff, exploding in a brilliant orange fireball 300 feet behind her. The second one was smarter. "Goose, take out that SAM sight now." "Engaging." Sarah dove hard, trading altitude for speed, jinking left and right, giving the missile's guidance system fits. Her airspeed indicator climbed past 600 knots. The missile stayed with her, relentless, closing. "Phoenix, you've got to brake harder. It's still tracking." She pulled back on the stick with both hands, her Super Hornet groaning under the stress, pushing the aircraft to its absolute limits. The missile was 100 feet behind her, 50 feet, 20. The explosion was enormous. The SA-15 detonated just behind her left engine, shrapnel shredding her tail section. Warning lights lit up her cockpit like a Christmas tree. Fire warnings, hydraulic failure, flight control damage. The aircraft yawed violently to the left, rolling inverted. "Phoenix is hit, Phoenix is hit," Reaper's voice cracked with panic. "I've got flames, significant damage, Phoenix, eject, eject, eject." Sarah fought the controls, but the Hornet was dying beneath her. She was at 8,000 feet, losing altitude fast, the aircraft tumbling toward the mountains below. Fire spread through the fuselage. She could feel the heat even through her flight suit. Training took over. Her right hand reached for the ejection handle between her legs, but she looked at her display one last time and saw the target coordinates, 3 miles away. 3 miles from the contractors who were counting on her. "Reaper, complete the mission," she transmitted, her voice eerily calm. "Get those people home." "Phoenix, no, eject now." "That's an order, Marcus, complete the mission." She had maybe 10 seconds before the aircraft became a fireball. Sarah pulled the ejection handle. The rocket motor beneath her seat fired with the force of a freight train, blasting her clear of the dying aircraft. The wind blast hit like a physical blow, spinning her violently. Her parachute deployed automatically. She felt the sharp jerk as the canopy caught air. Below her, her FA-18 augured into the mountainside and exploded in a rolling ball of orange flame. Above her she heard Reaper screaming, "Phoenix, Phoenix, do you copy, Phoenix?" But Sarah didn't answer. She was too busy watching the ground rush up, watching tracer fire arc toward her parachute, watching armed men emerge from buildings below. She'd survived the ejection. Now came the hard part. She landed hard in rocky terrain, her ankle twisting beneath her. Before she could release her parachute, rough hands grabbed her, slamming her face first into the dirt. Someone wrenched her arms behind her back. A rifle barrel pressed against her skull. In broken English, a voice growled, "American pilot, you are worth much money." Sarah tasted blood and sand. Above her she could hear Reaper's aircraft circling, searching, but he wouldn't find her. The parachute had dragged her into a ravine out of sight. "Reaper," she whispered, too quiet for anyone to hear. "Complete the mission, get them home." The last thing she saw before the hood went over her head was the sky, the beautiful, endless sky she'd lived to fly in, the sky she thought she'd never see again. Lieutenant Commander Sarah, Phoenix, Chen disappeared into the darkness. The woman who would emerge 23 months later would be someone else entirely. Someone broken. Someone who wished she'd died in that fireball after all. The facility. Location unknown. Day 1. The hood came off, and Sarah blinked against fluorescent lights that stabbed into her skull like ice picks. She was in a concrete room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with a single metal chair bolted to the floor. Her flight suit had been stripped away, replaced by rough cotton that smelled of mildew and fear. A man sat across from her, older, maybe 50, with gray hair and eyes like chips of coal. He spoke perfect English with a slight British accent, educated, intelligent. That made him more dangerous than any thug with a gun. "Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen," he said, reading from a file. "Call sign Phoenix, 23 combat missions, Distinguished Flying Cross, Navy Cross, quite the impressive record." He looked up and smiled. "Your country must be very proud." Sarah stared straight ahead, her jaw set. "Chen Sarah, Lieutenant Commander, service number." Yes, name, rank, and serial number. I know the script." He sighed, almost disappointed. "We're going to be spending quite a lot of time together, Commander. We can make this easy or we can make this very, very difficult. The choice is yours." She said nothing. That was day 1. Day 47. Sarah had lost track of time in the darkness. They kept her in a cell without windows, where fluorescent lights burned constantly or plunged into absolute blackness at their whim. Sleep became impossible. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. The interrogations followed no pattern. Sometimes they came twice a day. Sometimes they left her alone for what felt like weeks, until the silence became its own form of torture, until she started talking to herself just to remember what her voice sounded like. "Tell us about the encryption protocols on the Super Hornets communication system." The man, she'd learned his name was Kasim, asked for the 100th time. "Chen Sarah, Lieutenant Commander. Service number 450-892-7734. The slap came fast, snapping her head to the side. Her vision sparkled with stars. Blood filled her mouth, she'd bitten her tongue. "You're protecting a system that will be obsolete in 5 years, Qasim said reasonably, as if they were discussing the weather. Why suffer for outdated technology? Because it wasn't about the technology. It was about every pilot who would fly those missions after her, every sailor who depended on secure communications, every family waiting for their loved one to come home. Chen Sarah, Lieutenant Commander. This time the blow came from behind, kidney punch, stealing her breath. She gasped, doubled over in the chair. Stubborn, Qasim observed. Admirable, ultimately futile. Day 134. The worst part wasn't the beatings. The body could only hurt so much before it stopped registering pain, before nerve endings went numb and flesh became nothing more than meat. The worst part was the psychological warfare. They showed her videos of her funeral. Her mother collapsed in grief. Her father, the unbreakable Marine, with tears streaming down his face. Her squadron mates, people she'd trusted with her life, standing in dress whites as taps played. "They think you're dead," Qasim whispered in her ear. "They've mourned you, moved on. Your wingman, Marcus Williams, did you know he resigned his commission? Couldn't handle the guilt of leaving you behind." Sarah closed her eyes, but the images were burned into her brain. "No one is coming for you, Commander. No one even knows you're alive. You could tell me everything right now and nothing would change. You'd still be dead to the world." Chen Sarah. The waterboarding started on day 134. Day 389. Sarah no longer recognized herself in the cracked mirror they sometimes left in her cell. Her hair, once thick and black, had grown wild and matted. Her face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. Bruises in various stages of healing painted her skin in shades of purple, yellow, and green. But her eyes were the worst. They stared back at her empty, hollow, like looking into the eyes of a corpse. "Tell me about Operation Silent Thunder," Qasim said. They'd moved past technical questions to operational intelligence. "Who authorized the mission? What other operations are planned?" For the first time in over a year, Sarah spoke beyond her name and rank. "Go to hell." Qasim's smile was almost proud. "There she is. I was worried you'd broken completely. Where's the fun in that?" That night they burned her. Not enough to kill, just enough to make her understand that death might be a mercy they'd never grant. The smell of her own flesh charring would haunt her forever. Day 698. The escape. The new guard was young and overconfident. Sarah had been watching him for 3 weeks, noting his patterns, his carelessness. He looked at her and saw a broken woman, skin and bones, barely able to stand, no threat at all. He was wrong. When he brought her evening meal, she moved. 23 months of torture hadn't erased her training, only buried it. Her hands, weak, shaking, scarred, found his throat. The fight was brief and brutal. When it was over, she had his keys, his gun, and his uniform jacket. The escape was a blur of adrenaline and desperation. She moved through corridors she'd memorized from the sounds of footsteps, the echoes of voices. 2 more guards went down. She couldn't afford mercy, couldn't afford witnesses. Then she was outside, night air hitting her face like a benediction, and she ran. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction. Sarah had no map, no compass, only stars and a determination forged in 23 months of hell. She ran until her legs gave out, then crawled. Crawled until her hands bled, then dragged herself forward on her elbows. 17 miles, every inch paid for in blood and pain. Broken ribs from a fall in the dark. Fractured leg from stepping in a hole she didn't see. Dehydration turning her thoughts to fever dreams. She hallucinated Marcus's voice calling for her, her mother singing lullabies, her father telling her to get up, Marine, that's an order. On the 3rd day, She collapsed and couldn't get up again. That's where the CIA found her. Walter Reed Medical Center, Virginia. 6 months later. "You're a hero, Commander Chen," the admiral said, standing beside her hospital bed. "Your story needs to be told. America needs to know what you endured, what you survived." Sarah stared at her hands, wrapped in bandages, skin grafts still healing. The burns from her final torture session had been the worst. Degree burns across 20% of her body. The doctors had done their best, but the scars would never fully fade. In the mirror across the room, she could see her face. The burns that crawled up her neck, the hollow eyes that had seen too much, the stranger wearing her skin. "No," she whispered. "Commander, that woman is dead." Sarah's voice was hoarse, damaged. "Phoenix died in that facility. What came back? This isn't her." "You survived, that matters." "Did I?" She finally looked at the admiral. "Sir, I'm asking you to let me stay dead. Please, I can't. I can't be that person anymore. I don't know how." The admiral was quiet for a long time. Finally, he nodded. "What will you do?" Sarah looked out the window at the sky, vast and blue and free. She dreamed of that sky every day in captivity. Now it just reminded her of everything she'd lost. Something useful, something quiet, something that doesn't require being a hero. Because heroes were for people who still believed in happy endings. Sarah Chen had learned the truth. Sometimes survival was its own curse, and the worst prisons were the ones you carried in your mind. Phoenix had risen from the ashes once. This time she'd stay dead. It was easier that way. For everyone present day. Military Transport Flight 7293. Cruising altitude, 35,000 feet. Captain James Rodriguez had been flying for 22 years, and his body had never betrayed him. Not during combat missions over Iraq, not during emergency landings in Afghanistan, not during the countless hours of routine flights that made up the unglamorous reality of military aviation. But at 35,000 feet over the Rocky Mountains, his body decided today was the day. The pain started as a dull ache in his chest during pre-flight. He'd written it off as heartburn, too much coffee, not enough sleep. 48 years old meant you couldn't abuse your body like you did at 25. He'd taken an antacid and pushed through. Now, 90 minutes into the flight, the ache had become a vice grip crushing his sternum. "Captain, you're sweating," First Officer Michelle Torres said, her voice tight with concern. She was 31, sharp as a razor, and this was supposed to be a routine milk run to Andrews Air Force Base. Nothing about Rodriguez's gray pallor looked routine. "I'm fine," he lied, adjusting the climate control. But his left arm felt strange, heavy and distant, like it belonged to someone else. Tingling sensation spreading from shoulder to fingertips. Classic warning signs he'd learned about in every safety briefing, signs he was now expertly denying. "Sir, you don't look fine. You look like you're about to." "I said I'm fine, Lieutenant." His voice came out sharper than intended. Rodriguez gripped the yoke tighter, as if willpower alone could hold back the darkness creeping into the edges of his vision. In the passenger cabin, Sarah Chen felt the shift before she saw it. Combat pilots developed instincts that never fully disappeared, the ability to sense when something was wrong even when everything looked normal. The slight irregularity in the engine pitch. The almost imperceptible yaw correction. Someone in the cockpit was struggling. She glanced toward the sealed cockpit door, then back to her tablet. Not your problem, not your world anymore. But her hands had already stopped typing. 3 rows back, Lance Corporal David Martinez couldn't stop staring at the woman in 14C. He'd been trying to place her face for the last hour, and it was driving him crazy. The scars threw him off, but there was something about her profile, the way she held herself, rigid, controlled like coiled steel. His late platoon commander, Captain Richards, had kept a photo in his office, A group shot of fighter pilots on a carrier deck, all swagger and confidence. Richards had pointed to one pilot in particular. That's Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, call sign Phoenix. Best damn pilot I ever saw fly. Saved my convoy in Kandahar with a gun run so precise she took out enemy positions 20 meters from our position. 20 meters. She died 3 years ago on a classified op. Real loss. Martinez had studied that photo during the long nights in the desert. Phoenix had become something of a legend among the junior officers, proof that excellence transcended gender, that warriors came in all forms. The woman in 14C turned slightly, and Martinez's breath caught. The angle of her jaw, the way her eyes scanned her surroundings even while appearing to focus on her tablet. The burn scars couldn't hide what his gut was screaming. That's her, that's Phoenix, but she's supposed to be dead. He started to unbuckle his seatbelt, unsure what he'd even say, when the cockpit door burst open. We need a medical emergency in the cockpit. The flight attendant's voice cracked with barely controlled panic. The professional calm of routine service shattered like glass. Passengers looked up from books and phones, confusion rippling through the cabin. Is there a doctor on board? We need medical assistance immediately. Sarah's head snapped up. Through the open cockpit door, she could see Rodriguez slumped in his seat, Torres fumbling with her radio headset while trying to support the captain's weight. The fear on Torres' face was unmistakable. She was seconds from losing control. Staff Sergeant Monica Chen, no relation, pushed past passengers toward the cockpit. I'm a combat medic. She disappeared through the door. 30 seconds later, her voice carried back. Possible myocardial infarction. He's unconscious, pulse is thready. I need the AED from the emergency kit. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Not your problem, you're a consultant. A civilian, dead. Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Torres. The voice over the intercom trembled. We have a medical emergency with the captain. Please remain calm and stay in your seats. We are requesting priority landing clearance. A pause, then quieter almost to herself but broadcast to the entire cabin. Oh God, oh God. Denver Center, this is Transport 7293. We have the captain incapacitated. Requesting immediate vectors for emergency landing. Souls on board 47, fuel state 6 hours. The air traffic controller's response crackled through. Roger 7293, closest suitable airport is Colorado Springs, but be advised you're looking at severe icing conditions, mountain wave activity, and crosswinds gusting to 40 knots. Can you handle the approach? Silence too long. 7293, confirm you can handle the approach. Tor's voice was barely a whisper. I've never landed in conditions like this. My instrument rating is current, but I've only got 300 hours total time in. 7293, I need a yes or no. Can you execute the approach? A child started crying. Someone gasped. The cabin pressure seemed to drop even though the instruments showed normal. 47 people suddenly realized they were in a metal tube 7 miles above the earth with a pilot who was terrified and out of her depth. Martinez watched the woman in 14 see her scarred hands had gone white-knuckled on the armrests. Her eyes were closed, jaw clenched so tight he could see the muscle jumping. She was fighting something, some internal war playing out behind her closed eyelids. She knows, Martinez thought. She knows exactly what's happening up there because she's done it 1,000 times. Ma'am, he said quietly, leaning across the aisle. Sarah's eyes opened. Up close, Martinez could see the damage, the burned tissue, the nerve damage that made her right eye droop slightly. But he could also see the fire beneath, banked but not extinguished. You need to stay in your seat, Marine, Sarah said flatly. You're Phoenix, aren't you? The words came out before he could stop them. You're Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen. Her face went absolutely still. Phoenix is dead. Captain Richards showed me your photo. He said you were the best pilot he ever saw, he said. Your captain was wrong. Sarah's voice was ice. That woman died 3 years ago. Now sit down and... The aircraft lurched violently. Warning tones blared from the cockpit. Tor's scream cut through everything. Losing altitude, I can't, the controls are. The medic stumbled out of the cockpit, dragging the unconscious Rodriguez. I need help. We need to get him on the floor, start CPR. He's coding. Chaos erupted. Passengers shouted. The child's crying became screams. 2 men rushed to help the medic lower Rodriguez to the deck. The flight attendant grabbed the AED, hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Through it all, Sarah sat frozen, her eyes locked on the open cockpit door. She could see Tors in the left seat, alone, overwhelmed, making small inputs that were too timid, too late. The altitude indicator was unwinding. They were descending when they should be holding altitude. Not your problem, you died. You earned that death, stay dead. But she could also see the young Marine staring at her. The family with 3 children in row 8. The elderly couple celebrating their 50th anniversary in row 3. The pregnant woman in row 11, hands protectively over her belly. 47 souls. Phoenix had saved hundreds during her career. She put her life on the line again and again because that's what you did. That's what honor demanded. But that was before the torture, before the scars, before she'd broken so completely that even breathing felt like defeat. Please, Tors sobbed over the intercom. Is there anyone who can help? Anyone with flight experience? The aircraft shuddered again. They were in the weather now, ice forming on the wings, mountain turbulence throwing them around like a toy. 47 souls. Sarah stood up. Martinez's eyes widened. Ma'am. Stay in your seat, Marine. Keep everyone calm. Her voice had changed, still damaged, still raspy, but carrying an edge of command that made Martinez sit up straighter. That's an order. She moved toward the cockpit, each step feeling like walking through concrete. The flight attendant moved to stop her, professional protocol warring with desperation. Ma'am, you need to. Call sign Phoenix, Sarah said quietly. The words felt like broken glass in her throat. United States Navy, I'm flying this aircraft. The flight attendant's mouth fell open. Behind Sarah, she heard gasps, murmurs, the words spreading through the cabin like wildfire. Sarah reached the cockpit door and looked back once. 47 faces stared at her, terrified, hopeful, desperate. She wanted to stay dead. But apparently, Phoenix had one more flight left in her. Sarah's hand touched the cockpit door frame, and her entire body locked up. 3 years. 3 years since she'd been in a cockpit. 3 years since her fingers had wrapped around a throttle, since she'd felt the responsive shudder of an aircraft answering her commands. 3 years since the fire, the explosion, the screaming alarms that still haunted her dreams. You can turn around. You can sit back down. You earn the right to stay broken. But behind her, she heard the AED charging, heard the medic counting compressions on Rodriguez's chest, heard a child crying, "Mommy, are we going to crash?" Sarah stepped through the door. First Officer Michelle Tors looked up from the controls, her face streaked with tears, and her expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something close to horror. Your Tors' voice cracked. I attended your memorial service. You can't be, you're dead. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. Sarah's attempt at levity fell flat even to her own ears. She moved to the captain's seat, now empty except for the blood pressure cuff and medical debris. Right now, Lieutenant, I need you to focus. Can you do that? Tors stared at the scarred woman who just walked out of the grave. Sarah knew what she was seeing. The burns, the damaged face, the ghost of the hero whose flag-draped coffin Tors had saluted 3 years ago. I can't. This isn't possible. The aircraft lurched, dropping 50 feet in mountain turbulence. Altitude alert klaxons wailed. They were descending through 33,000 feet at 800 feet per minute, not catastrophic yet, but Torres was losing the aircraft 1 degree at a time. "Lieutenant Torres," Sarah's voice cracked like a whip, pure command cutting through the shock. "I need you with me right now. Are you a pilot or aren't you?" Torres blinked, sucked in a shaking breath, and nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Then talk to me. What's our situation?" Sarah slid into the captain's seat, and the moment her hands touched the controls, 20 years of training collided with 3 years of trauma. The yoke felt foreign and familiar all at once, smooth plastic under her scarred palms, responsive to the slightest pressure. For a heartbeat, she wasn't in a transport cockpit. She was in her FA-18, flames erupting around her, missile warnings screaming the last seconds before. "Ma'am," Torres' voice yanked her back. Sarah blinked hard, forcing the flashback down. "Situation report, Lieutenant, now." "We're at 32,800 feet descending. Denver Center cleared us for emergency landing at Colorado Springs. Weather is IFR, instrument flight rules, with moderate to severe icing, mountain wave turbulence, winds gusting to 40 knots with variable direction." Torres' voice steadied as she fell into the familiar rhythm of procedure. "Fuel state is good. All systems are nominal except—" She hesitated. "Except what?" "During the initial upset when the captain collapsed, we picked up ice on the wings. I activated the anti-ice systems, but we're borderline for conditions. And I've never," Torres swallowed hard, "I've never landed in crosswinds over 30 knots. Never landed with this much ice. Never." "First time for everything," Sarah said, her hands already moving across the panel, checking systems, verifying settings. The muscle memory was still there, buried under layers of trauma but rising to the surface like water finding cracks in stone. "What's our distance to Colorado Springs?" 97 nautical miles, 22 minutes at current speed." Sarah keyed the radio, and speaking her call sign aloud felt like tearing open an old wound. "Denver Center, this is call sign Phoenix. I have the aircraft." "Static then. Say again, did you say Phoenix?" "Affirmative, Denver. Call sign Phoenix, formerly Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, United States Navy. I'm rated on multiple military platforms and I'm taking command of this aircraft." Silence stretched for 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours. "Phoenix, your call sign was retired 3 years ago. We have you listed as KIA." "Denver, we can discuss my resurrection later. Right now, I need current weather for Colorado Springs, best approach option given conditions, and I need you to clear everything out of my way. We have a critical medical emergency and 47 souls on board who'd really like to see tomorrow." The controller's voice changed, became crisper, more focused. He'd gone from confusion to mission mode. "Roger, Phoenix. Stand by for weather and approach information." Sarah turned to Torres. "I need you to be my first officer. Not my passenger, not my assistant, my first officer. You're going to read instruments, manage systems, and back me up on everything. Can you do that?" Torres looked at this scarred ghost who'd just taken command with the casual confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Yes, ma'am, but how are you here? How are you alive?" Long story involving a lot of sand and several very bad decisions. Sarah's hands moved across the controls, making small corrections, feeling how the aircraft responded. The C-40 was heavier than her FA-18, more sluggish, but the fundamentals were the same. "Right now, what you need to know is that I'm qualified, I'm capable, and I'm going to get us on the ground safely." "Phoenix, Denver Center," the radio crackled. "Current weather Colorado Springs, ceiling 800 feet overcast, visibility 2 miles in light snow, winds 280 at 25 gusting to 42 knots, temperature -4 Celsius. Recommend ILS approach runway 35 left. Nearest alternate is Denver International, 75 miles north." Sarah did the calculations instantly. 42-knot gusts with a runway alignment of 350 degrees meant they'd be fighting a brutal crosswind on final approach. The low ceiling meant they'd break out of the clouds with maybe 500 feet to correct and align. The ice on the wings would affect their handling and increase stall speed. "Confirm ILS-35 left," Sarah transmitted. "Request priority handling. You're cleared direct SBRINGS VOR. Descend and maintain 16,000. All other traffic is being vectored clear." Sarah eased the throttles back, beginning their descent. The aircraft responded smoothly, but she felt the sluggishness in the controls, the ice accumulation making the airframe heavier, less responsive. "Tors, I need you to monitor our airspeed like a hawk. Ice is going to want to drop our speed, but we push too hard and we'll pick up more ice. It's a balancing act." "Yes, ma'am. Current airspeed 340 knots. Behind them, they could hear the medics still working on Rodriguez. The steady rhythm of CPR compressions, the AED announcing, analyzing rhythm, the controlled urgency of someone fighting to keep another human alive. Just like Sarah was fighting to keep 47 people alive. The aircraft bucked in turbulence and Sarah's hands moved automatically, correcting, smoothing, compensating. But in her peripheral vision she saw flames, smelled smoke, heard alarms that weren't really there. "Ma'am, you okay?" Tors had noticed her white-knuckled grip on the yoke. "I'm fine," the lie came automatically. "How's our ice accumulation?" Holding steady with anti-ice on, but Tors' voice rose. "Ma'am, we just lost the number 2 engine anti-ice indicator. I think the sensor's iced over." "Perfect, because this wasn't complicated enough already." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Switch to backup heating. Monitor EGT, exhaust gas temperature. If that engine starts running cold, we'll know we have a problem." They descended through 25,000 feet. The mountain peaks of the Rockies rose around them like teeth, snow-covered and beautiful and deadly. Sarah had flown through worse, enemy territory at night with Sam's tracking, but this felt different. Then, she'd only had herself to lose. Now, 47 people were counting on hands that still shook, on a mind that still saw ghosts, on a pilot who died in the desert and wasn't sure she'd ever really come back. "Phoenix, Denver, you're cleared to 12,000. Contact Colorado Springs approach on 125.35. Roger, 125.35. Sarah changed frequencies and the new controller came on immediately. "Phoenix, Colorado Springs approach. We have you on radar descending to 12,000. Say your qualifications and flight experience." For the first time in 3 years, Sarah let herself remember who she'd been. 20 years military aviation, 3,000 hours fighter time, multiple combat deployments, carrier qualified, every emergency you can imagine and a few you can't. "Copy that, Phoenix. We'll get you down. Turn right heading 160, vectors for ILS-35 left." Sarah banked the aircraft, feeling the ice-heavy wings resist, then comply. Tors called out altitudes. Behind them the medic's voice. "He's back. Weak pulse, but he's back." One crisis stabilized. Now Sarah just had to land a heavy transport in conditions that would challenge any pilot, while fighting demons that whispered she should have stayed dead. "Tors," Sarah said quietly, "I need you to know something." "Ma'am." "I haven't flown in 3 years, haven't touched controls since the day I was shot down." She took a breath. "So if I start to lose it up here, I need you to pull me back. Can you do that?" Tors looked at this broken hero, this ghost who'd walked out of the past to save them, and nodded. "We're going to make it, ma'am. I know we are." Sarah wished she shared that confidence. But Phoenix had always flown on determination, not certainty. Time to see if she still remembered how. The aircraft descended through 12,000 feet, and Sarah's world narrowed to instruments, procedures, and the battle raging inside her skull. Every gauge she scanned brought back memories. Every switch she touched was a ghost of missions past. The artificial horizon showed wings level, but in her mind's eye, she saw her FA-18 rolling inverted, flames painting the canopy orange. Phoenix, turn left heading 120, descend and maintain 10,000. Sarah's hand moved to comply, then froze. The throttles. She was staring at the throttles, and suddenly they weren't throttles anymore. They were the ejection handle she'd pulled 3 years ago, the last act of the pilot she used to be. "Ma'am," Tor's voice cut through the fog, "they need us to turn to 120. Sarah blinked hard, forced her hand to the yoke. "Roger, left to 120, descend to 10,000. The turn was smooth, professional. No one would know that for 3 seconds. She'd been somewhere else entirely, strapped into a dying fighter, watching the altimeter unwind while enemy guns tracked her parachute. Colorado Springs altimeter 29.92, you're 18 miles from the outer marker. Reduce speed to 210 knots. Reducing to 210, Sarah confirmed, pulling the throttles back. The engine spooled down and the aircraft decelerated. She felt every vibration, every subtle change in the airframe's behavior. The ice was still there, adding weight, changing the aerodynamics in ways that could kill them if she misjudged. In the cabin, Martinez had taken charge of keeping passengers calm. He'd seen enough combat to recognize when people needed leadership, needed someone to tell them everything would be okay, even if it might be a lie. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Lance Corporal Martinez, United States Marine Corps." His voice carried authority beyond his 25 years. "The woman who just entered the cockpit is one of the finest pilots this country has ever produced. We're in good hands. I need everyone to review the safety card in your seat pocket, make sure your seat belts are tight, and brace positions will be called if needed." An older man, maybe 60, called out, "Who is she? What's her name?" Martinez looked toward the cockpit, remembering the photo in Captain Richards' office, remembering the stories of impossible missions and death-defying saves. "Her name is Phoenix, sir, and legends don't die, they just come back when you need them most." In the cockpit, Sarah was anything but legendary. She was terrified. "Approach, what's the current wind check?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Wind 290 at 28, gusts to 43. Runway 35 left gives you about a 30-degree crosswind component." Tor's eyes widened. "Ma'am, that's approaching the aircraft's maximum demonstrated crosswind component." "I know," Sarah's jaw set. "We'll manage. What's Rodriguez's status?" Tor's keyed the intercom. "Medical team, what's the captain's condition?" The medic's voice came back strained. "Stabilized but critical. He needs a hospital ASAP." "Copy that." Sarah switched back to approach control. "Colorado Springs, be advised we need emergency medical standing by. Heart attack victim, critical condition." "Roger, Phoenix. Emergency services are rolling. You're 10 miles from the outer marker, turn left heading 90, maintain 10,000 until established on the localizer, cleared ILS runway 35 left. Left to 90, maintain 10,000 until established, cleared ILS 35 left." Sarah turned to Tors. "Okay, here's how this works. I fly, you back me up. Call out every altitude, every airspeed deviation, every warning light. You're my safety net." "Understood, ma'am." Tor's hands moved across her panel, configuring systems. "I have the approach plate up. Decision height is 618 feet. Missed approach is climbed to 3,000 heading 360. Good, if I call go around, you push those throttles to the firewall and don't question it. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." They flew in tense silence for 90 seconds. The weather worsened. Snow streaked past the windscreen, and ice continued to build despite the anti-ice systems working overtime. The wings carried a visible glaze now, a coating that could disrupt airflow and cause a stall with no warning. "Phoenix, you're approaching the localizer from the right. Turn left heading 50, intercept and track. Sarah turned, watching the needles on the instrument panel. The localizer needles swung from right to left as they intercepted the electronic beam that would guide them to the runway. She made small corrections, keeping the needles centered, feeling the aircraft fight her in the gusting wind. Localizer alive, Torres called. Glide slope is coming active, now. The second needle appeared, showing their vertical position relative to the ideal descent path. Sarah began descending, reducing power, extending flaps in careful increments. And that's when the flashback hit hard. The flap extension sounded like an explosion in her ears. Suddenly, she wasn't in a transport cockpit. She was in her Super Hornet, and that sound was a missile detonating, shrapnel tearing through her aircraft, fire erupting. Altitude 9,800, descending, Torres called. Flames everywhere, canopy cracking, hydraulic fluid spraying, the stick going dead in her hands. Ma'am, altitude 9,600, rate of descent is 1,000 feet per minute. The ejection handle, the rocket blast, the violent separation, spinning, can't breathe, can't. Commander, Torres grabbed Sarah's shoulder, shaking her. Altitude 9,400, you're descending too fast. Sarah gasped, the present slamming back into focus. They were descending at 1,200 feet per minute, too fast, too steep. Her hands were frozen on the controls. Torres was staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. I've got it, Sarah choked out, adding power, correcting the descent rate. I've got it. But she didn't, not really. The ghosts were too strong, the memories too vivid. Every sound in the cockpit was a warning alarm from that last mission. Every vibration was enemy fire. Every. Ma'am, talk to me. Torres' voice was firm. What do you need? I need. Sarah's breath came in short gasps. I need you to call out every step. Keep me in the present. Don't let me drift. Torres nodded, understanding dawning. Altitude 8,900 feet on glide slope, airspeed 190 knots, rate of descent 700 feet per minute. All parameters good. The steady stream of callouts became Sarah's lifeline. Each number was a tether to the present, pulling her away from the past. 8,000 feet on glide slope, airspeed 185. Sarah made small corrections, fighting the wind that tried to push them left of course, fighting the memories that tried to push her into paralysis. 7,500 feet, slightly high on glide slope, airspeed 180. She reduced power fractionally, the glide slope needle centered. 7,000 feet on glide slope on course, airspeed 175. Looking good, ma'am. Gear down, Sarah commanded, her voice strengthening. Torres threw the gear lever. 3 green lights, nose, left main, right main. Gear down and locked, 3 green. The aircraft's handling changed with the gear extension, more drag, more stable. Sarah adjusted power to maintain approach speed. 6,000 feet on glide slope on course. Wind check is 290 at 32, gusting 40. The crosswind was pushing them, and Sarah crabbed the aircraft into the wind, flying at an angle to keep them tracking straight down the approach path. In the back, passengers could see they were flying sideways, and new murmurs of fear rippled through the cabin. Martinez's voice rose above the fear. That's normal. The pilot is compensating for crosswind. This is exactly what she's supposed to do. 5,000 feet on glide slope on course, airspeed 165. Flaps to full. Flaps full. The final flap extension. Maximum drag, maximum lift, configured for landing. The aircraft slowed to 150 knots, approach speed for their weight plus the ice penalty. 4,000 feet. Beginning to pick up ice again, ma'am, seeing accumulation on the windscreen. Sarah saw it too, ice forming on the glass, obscuring their forward vision. The wipers fought to keep it clear, but they were losing the battle. 3,000 feet on glide slope on course, still IMC in the clouds. They should have broken out by now. The ceiling was reported at 800 feet, which meant they should see the ground at around 2,000 feet above sea level. But they were at 3,000 feet and still in solid clouds. Phoenix, Colorado Springs, latest weather shows ceiling now 600 feet, variable to 400. Visibility 1.5 miles. It was getting worse. Of course it was getting worse. 2,500 feet, still IMC on glide slope on course, airspeed 155. Sarah's hands were cramping from gripping the yoke so tight. Sweat ran down her back despite the cool cockpit. Every second felt like an hour. 2,000 feet still in the clouds on glide slope. Wait, I see lights. Ground contact. Through the swirling snow, runway lights appeared like diamonds scattered on black velvet. But they were at an angle. The crosswind had pushed them despite Sarah's corrections. 1,500 feet, runway in sight, you're right of center line. Sarah made the correction, but the wind fought her, gusting, shifting, trying to throw them off course. 1,000 feet on center line on glide slope, airspeed 150. They were committed now, too low to go around safely, too close to abort. Sarah had to land this aircraft or die trying. 500 feet on center line gust, left wing dropping. The aircraft rolled left as a wind gust hit them from the right. Sarah countered instantly, full right aileron, but they were low, so low, and the runway was rushing up fast. Decision height. Sarah saw the runway, saw the crosswind, saw the ice on the wings, and made a decision that every fiber of her training screamed against. I'm taking it all the way down. Ma'am. Tors, I need you to trust me. The runway was 300 feet below, 200, 100. And Sarah was about to do something that would either save them all or kill them all. Phoenix was flying again. And this time she wasn't going to crash. 50 feet above the runway, Sarah Chen fought two battles simultaneously, one against physics and weather, the other against her own shattered mind. The C-40 transport hung in the air, crabbed 30 degrees into the howling crosswind, ice-laden wings shuddering with each gust. Through the windscreen, runway lights streaked past at 140 knots, white lines painted on black asphalt that would either be their salvation or their grave. 40 feet on centerline, airspeed 145, Tors called, her voice tight but steady. She'd become more than a first officer in the last 20 minutes. She'd become Sarah's lifeline to reality. But reality was fracturing. Sarah saw the runway. She also saw the desert where she'd crashed 3 years ago. She felt the yoke in her hands. She also felt the ejection handle. The overlapping images threatened to tear her mind apart, present and past bleeding together until she couldn't tell which was real. The runway is real. The lights are real. Tors is real. 30 feet, slight sink rate increase. A massive wind gust hammered them from the right. The left wing dropped violently, and for one heart-stopping moment they were rolling inverted, except they weren't. Sarah's hands moved on pure instinct, right aileron, right rudder, adding a burst of power to arrest the descent. But in her mind she was in the Super Hornet, alarms screaming, flames erupting, the aircraft tumbling toward the mountains while enemy tracers lit up the night. 20 feet, Tors' shout cut through the hallucination. Wings level on center line, you're doing it. Sarah blinked hard, forcing herself present. The technique was called a side slip, flying sideways to the runway, using the crosswind to maintain course while keeping the aircraft aligned with rudder. At the last possible second, she'd have to transition to a wing-low landing, dropping the upwind wheel first to prevent the wind from flipping them. 10 feet. Sarah kicked left rudder hard. The nose swung to align with the runway. Simultaneously, she dropped the right wing into the wind, holding it there with aileron while opposite rudder kept them straight. The aircraft hung at an impossible angle, right wheel low, left wheel high, flying sideways at 130 knots, ice breaking off the wings in chunks. 5 feet. In the cabin, passengers gripped armrests with white knuckles. Children buried their faces in their parents' shoulders. Martinez braced himself and prayed to a god he'd stopped believing in after Fallujah. 3 feet. Sarah saw the ground rushing up, saw the flames, saw the ejection, saw 23 months of darkness. "You've got this," Tor screamed. "Phoenix, you've got this." The name jolted through Sarah like electricity. Phoenix, the pilot who never quit, the pilot who always found a way, the pilot who rose from the ashes. 2 feet. Sarah's hands made microcorrections so fast they blurred. Right wheel reaching for pavement. Left wheel suspended. Nose aligned. The aircraft balanced on a knife's edge between controlled flight and catastrophic crash. 1 foot. The right main gear kissed the runway with a chirp of rubber on concrete. For one perfect second, they rolled on one set of wheels, the aircraft suspended in controlled chaos. Then Sarah lowered the left main gear, and both mains were down. She held the nose high, using aerodynamic braking, feeling the aircraft slow from 130 knots to 110 to 90. At 70 knots, she lowered the nose wheel. "Reverse thrust," she commanded. Tor's hands flew to the throttles, pulling them into reverse. The engines roared, sound and fury fighting momentum and ice and physics. Sarah stood on the brakes, literally stood, both feet pressed against the pedals with every ounce of strength she had. The anti-skid system pulsed under her feet, preventing the wheels from locking, but they were going too fast. The runway was too icy, and the end was coming up too quickly. "We're not going to stop," Tor's voice cracked. "There's not enough runway." The end of the pavement loomed ahead, 3,000 feet, 2,000 feet. They were still doing 40 knots. Beyond the runway, Sarah could see the arresting barrier installed for emergencies, thick cables designed to catch fighter jets. "We're too heavy. Those cables will rip the landing gear off." 1,000 feet to the barrier, 35 knots, still too fast. Sarah made a decision. She released the brakes for 1 second, then slammed them again, pulsing manually to find the edge of traction. The aircraft shuddered, slewed slightly right, then grabbed. 500 feet, 25 knots. "Come on, come on, come on," Sarah whispered, a prayer to machine that had carried them through hell. 300 feet, 20 knots. The barrier's emergency lights glowed red in the darkness, if they hit it. 200 feet, 15 knots. Tor's was crying, hands braced against the instrument panel, waiting for impact. 100 feet, 10 knots. The aircraft rolled slower, slower. 50 feet from the barrier, they stopped. Complete silence. Even the engines seemed to hold their breath. Then Tor's voice, barely a whisper, "We're down. Oh my God, we're down." Sarah's hands were still locked on the yoke in a death grip. She tried to release them, but they wouldn't move. 3 years of fear and trauma had frozen them in place. "Ma'am," Torres looked over. "Commander Chen, Sarah." The use of her first name broke through. Sarah's hands released. They were shaking so violently she had to put them in her lap, but she'd done it. She'd actually done it. Colorado Springs Tower, Transport 7293, is safely on the ground. Tor's voice trembled with relief and disbelief. "Requesting immediate medical to our position." "Roger 7293. Emergency vehicles are rolling." That was one hell of a landing. In the cabin, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then someone started clapping. Someone else joined. Within seconds, the entire passenger compartment erupted in applause, tears, and prayers of thanks. The medic appeared in the cockpit doorway. "Captain Rodriguez is stable. We need to move him now." Sarah nodded mutely. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. The adrenaline that had kept her functional for the last 30 minutes was draining away, leaving behind exhaustion so profound she could barely breathe. Tors reached over and gripped her shoulder. I don't know who you are now or what happened to you, but I know who you were just now. You were Phoenix. You saved 47 lives. I almost killed 47 people, Sarah said hoarsely. Did you see my hands shaking? Did you see me freeze up? I could barely hold it together. But you did hold it together. That's what matters. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft, their lights painting the snow-covered runway in red and blue. Paramedics rushed aboard, extracting Rodriguez on a stretcher. Passengers began deplaning, many stopping to look toward the cockpit to try to see the woman who'd brought them home. Martinez pushed through to the cockpit door. He stood at attention and saluted, crisp, perfect, the kind of salute you give a hero. Permission to speak, ma'am. Sarah looked at this young Marine who'd recognized her, who'd believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. Granted. Captain Richards, my who showed me your photo, he told me something before he died. He said the measure of a warrior isn't whether they feel fear, it's whether they fly anyway. Martinez's eyes were wet. You were terrified up here, I could see it, but you flew anyway, that's what makes you Phoenix. Sarah's throat tightened. For 3 years she'd told herself she was broken beyond repair, that the pilot who'd earned that call sign had died in the desert, that Phoenix was a lie. But maybe she'd been wrong. The airport operations vehicle pulled up, and a figure emerged, salt and pepper hair, navy dress blues, the bearing of a man who'd spent his life in command. Captain Marcus Reaper Williams, her former wingman, stood in the snow, staring up at the aircraft. Sarah's breath caught. Marcus, the man who'd watched her die, the man who'd spent 3 years living with the guilt of leaving her behind. She stood on shaking legs and walked to the door. The stairs were lowered. She descended slowly, each step an act of will, until she stood on the tarmac facing the man who'd been her closest friend. Marcus's face was a mask of shock, grief, and something close to awe. Hey, Reaper, Sarah said quietly. Sorry I missed my own funeral. His composure shattered. He closed the distance in 3 strides and pulled her into a crushing embrace. Sarah felt him shaking, felt tears on his neck, heard him whisper over and over, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I looked for you. I looked for you. I know, Sarah said, and for the first time in 3 years she let herself cry. Not tears of pain or shame, but of release. I know you did. They stood in the falling snow while emergency crews worked around them, while passengers watched, while Tors looked on from the cockpit with tears streaming down her face. Finally, Marcus pulled back, his hands on Sarah's shoulders. The Navy will want to debrief you. The media will go insane. There'll be questions, investigations, congressional hearings probably. I know. Are you ready for that? Sarah looked back at the aircraft, battered, ice-covered, but safely on the ground. She thought about 47 people who would see tomorrow because she'd found the courage to fly one more time. No, she said honestly. I'm not ready. I'm broken, Marcus. I'm scared. I wake up screaming. I see fire when I close my eyes. But maybe broken pilots can still fly. She met his eyes. Maybe Phoenix doesn't mean you never fall. Maybe it means you get back up anyway. Marcus smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him in forever. There's someone who needs to see you, someone who's been waiting 3 years. Who? A car pulled up and an older woman emerged. Gray hair, eyes red from crying, wearing a Navy mom's jacket. Sarah's mother. And Sarah Chen, Lieutenant Commander, call sign Phoenix, the pilot who died and somehow come back, walked toward her mother through the snow, ready to face whatever came next. Because Phoenix had risen from the ashes one more time. And this time she wasn't going to hide. Sarah's mother, Helen Chen, stood motionless beside the black sedan, her hand pressed against her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. The snow fell between them like a curtain separating the living from the dead. Mom, Sarah whispered, the word catching in her throat. Helen took one trembling step forward, then another. Then she was running, and Sarah was running, and they collided in the middle of the snow-covered tarmac with enough force to knock the breath from both of them. My baby girl." Helen's voice broke on every syllable. Her hands moved across Sarah's face, touching the scars, the burns, mapping the damage. "They told me you were dead. They gave me a flag. I buried an empty coffin. I know, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Sarah held her mother like she was drowning, like Helen was the only solid thing in a world that had become untethered. "I couldn't come back. I was too broken. I thought it would be easier for everyone if I stayed dead." Helen pulled back, gripping Sarah's shoulders hard enough to bruise. Her eyes, the same dark eyes Sarah saw in the mirror, blazed with an emotion somewhere between fury and devastating love. "Easier?" Helen's voice shook. "Do you know what it did to me? What it did to your father before She stopped, and Sarah saw the truth in her mother's face. "Dad?" Sarah's world tilted. "Where's Dad?" "Heart attack, 8 months after your funeral." Helen's tears carved tracks through the snow melting on her face. "The doctors said it was cardiac arrest, but I knew it was grief. You were his whole world, Sarah, his little warrior, and when they told him you were gone." Sarah's legs gave out. She would have fallen if Marcus hadn't caught her from behind, supporting her weight while she processed this new devastation. Her father, retired Marine Colonel James Chen, the man who'd taught her to fly kites and then fighter jets, the man who'd stood stone-faced at her commissioning while his eyes shone with pride, was gone. Because of her. "I killed him," Sarah gasped. "I killed Dad." "No." Helen's voice was steel wrapped in silk. She cupped Sarah's scarred face in both hands, forcing eye contact. "The people who shot you down killed him. The people who tortured you killed him. You survived. You fought. You came home. Don't you dare dishonor his memory by claiming responsibility for evil done by evil people." Behind them, news vans were arriving, drawn by reports of the emergency landing and rumors that a dead pilot had risen from the grave. Camera lights cut through the darkness. Reporters shouted questions. Marcus moved to intercept them. "You need to get out of here, now, before this becomes a circus." But Sarah shook her head. She was done hiding. "Let them come," she said quietly. "I've been a ghost for 3 years. It's time to be real again." A reporter broke through the line, young, ambitious, microphone thrust forward. "Commander Chen, is it true you've been alive for 3 years? Where have you been? Why didn't you come forward?" Sarah looked at the camera, at the red recording light, at her reflection in the lens. "Scarred, damaged, alive. I was captured, tortured, I escaped. When I came back I was—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I was ashamed. Ashamed of being broken. Ashamed that I wasn't the hero everyone remembered. So I hid. I told myself I was doing it for everyone else, but really I was doing it for me. Because facing the world as damaged goods felt harder than staying dead." And now another reporter called. "What changed?" Sarah turned to look at the aircraft behind her, battered but safe. Its passengers alive because she'd found the courage to fly one more time. 47 people needed a pilot, and I realized that broken doesn't mean useless. Scared doesn't mean incapable. Phoenix doesn't mean you never fall, it means you get back up. A commotion at the aircraft stairs drew everyone's attention. Passengers were deplaning, many stopping to look toward Sarah. The pregnant woman from row 11 approached, tears streaming. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, placing Sarah's scarred hand on her swollen belly. "My daughter is going to meet her father because of you. He's deployed in Korea. We were flying to see him before deployment ends." The elderly couple from row 3 came next, the husband supporting his wife who could barely walk. 50 years married today," he said. "We thought we'd die on our anniversary. Instead, we get to celebrate because you remembered how to fly." One by one, passengers approached, each one a life saved, each one a reason to stop hiding. The young Marine, Martinez, was last. He didn't speak. He simply rendered the sharpest salute Sarah had ever received. She returned it and felt something inside her chest, something that had been frozen for 3 years, begin to thaw. A black SUV pulled up, and a man in navy dress blues emerged. Rear Admiral Patricia Morrison, no relation to Sarah's former squadron commander, walked with the bearing of someone used to commanding respect. "Commander Chen, I'm afraid we have a lot to discuss." Her tone was professional, but her eyes held something softer. "Medical evaluation, psychological assessment, debriefing on your captivity, questions about why you chose to remain hidden." "I understand, ma'am." "However," Morrison continued, "I'm also authorized to tell you that your country owes you an apology. We failed you. We left you behind. We gave up too soon." She paused. "And we'd very much like to offer you a chance to fly again, officially, if you're willing." Sarah looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly, at her mother, who gripped her hand tight, at Tors, watching from the aircraft door, at the passengers whose lives she'd saved. "I'm not the same pilot who was shot down 3 years ago," Sarah said carefully. "I have PTSD. I have panic attacks. I see ghosts when I fly. I'm broken in ways that might not ever fully heal." "I didn't ask if you were perfect," Morrison replied. "I asked if you were willing." Sarah thought about the terror in the cockpit, the flashbacks that nearly killed everyone, the way her hands had shaken, the way her mind had fractured. She also thought about the landing, about finding the strength to fly despite the fear, about 47 people breathing because she'd refused to quit. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said, and felt the weight of 3 years begin to lift. "I'm willing." The snow fell harder, blanketing the runway in white. Emergency crews finished their work. Passengers loaded into buses heading to the terminal, but Sarah stood still, face tilted toward the sky, feeling snowflakes melt against her scars. Marcus moved beside her. "You know the media's going to call you a hero. Books, movies, speaking tour, the whole 9 yards. I'm not a hero, Reaper. I'm just a pilot who got one more chance." "That's exactly what makes you a hero," he smiled. "Welcome home, Phoenix." Helen wrapped Sarah in her coat, trying to shield her from the cold, from the cameras, from the world that would demand pieces of her. "What happens now?" Helen asked. Sarah looked at the C-40 transport, at the emergency vehicles, at the news cameras documenting her resurrection. She thought about the long road ahead, the therapy, the questions, the slow process of rebuilding a life from ashes. "Now," Sarah smiled, really smiled for the first time in 3 years. "Now I stop hiding, I get help, I face the demons, and maybe, eventually, I fly again. And if you can't, then I'll find another way to serve. But I'm done being dead, Mom. I'm done being a ghost." She squeezed her mother's hand. "Phoenix rises, that's what she does, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." They walked toward the terminal together, Sarah, Helen, and Marcus, while behind them the aircraft sat silent on the snow-covered runway. The aircraft that had carried a ghost and landed with a pilot. Inside the terminal, passengers waited to thank her properly. Media waited for the full story. The Navy waited to reclaim one of their own. The world waited to celebrate a miracle. But Sarah Chen, Lieutenant Commander, call sign Phoenix, wasn't worried about any of that. She'd survived torture, survived captivity, survived 3 years of self-imposed exile. She'd survived the landing. Everything else would be easy by comparison. As they entered the terminal, a little girl, maybe 7 years old, tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "Are you really Phoenix, the pilot who came back from the dead?" Sarah knelt down, eye level with the child. "I'm really Phoenix, and you know what the most important thing about Phoenix is?" "What?" "No matter how many times you fall, no matter how badly you get hurt, you always get back up. You always rise again." The little girl smiled, like a superhero. Sarah touched her scarred face, felt her damaged hands, carried the weight of all her broken pieces. Yeah, she said softly, just like a superhero. She stood, took her mother's hand, and walked into her future. Uncertain, damaged, but finally alive. Phoenix had risen from the ashes, and this time she was home to stay. The end.